Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. Today we feature a talk by Jeremy Scahill, the Polk Award-winning investigative reporter who's written the definitive book about the U.S. military company Blackwater. He talked in the fall at Wesleyan University and discussed the total collapse of congressional nerve in the face of demands for war. We're also proud to present an interview with Zoya. Zoya is an Afghan women's rights activist. She wrote an autobiography about her struggles and the Afghan women's struggle in the face of tremendous and horrific repression by various dictatorships and women-hating regimes. The U.S. occupation of Afghanistan is often defended as being necessary to defend Afghan women's rights, so it's essential to listen to an actual Afghan woman about what she thinks of her so-called liberators. For security reasons, I was not able to photograph Zoya. It's a sound-only interview. We begin in Middletown, Connecticut.
Now, I think it's a bit disingenuous of people to claim that they were somehow duped by Barack Obama. And you'll see people saying, well, this isn't a change I could believe in. The fact is that people who say that clearly never listen to anything except the tin can speeches of Barack Obama. If you actually read his foreign policy platform, if you read the speech that he launched his national political career from in October of 2002 in front of the Federal Building in Chicago, you would realize that Obama is firmly within the tradition of political leaders that want to continue imperialist policies of the United States. Obama was hardly an anti-war candidate, and yet he picked up on the lessons of Howard Dean in the 2004 election and allowed people to believe that he was the anti-war candidate. But if you actually examined his policy platform, if you looked at the people who were his advisors, and now if you look at the people that he has selected to manage U.S. wars abroad, you'll find that Barack Obama fits firmly in history's place with Reagan, Bush, Clinton, and the other Bush. He is extending, continuing, and in some cases worsening the policies that all of us were forced to live under during the 8 years of the Bush administration. In Iraq, right now, the U.S. occupation is not coming to an end anytime soon. Michelle Flournoy, who is the Assistant Defense Secretary, testified in front of the Congress 2 weeks ago and said publicly that the U.S. is considering keeping the occupation going. She didn't use the word occupation, but keeping a sizable U.S. military presence in the country. And they're essentially trying to pass the blame on this over to the Iraqis and saying, well, if the Iraqis postpone the elections in January, then the United States is going to continue on. I have believed for a long time that the Obama administration never had the intent of leaving Iraq. I think we're going to see a downsizing, as we already are, of the occupation and a rebranding of it as a stabilization operation combined with training of the Iraqi military. But what we're also seeing is that the Obama administration, as U.S. troops are drawn down, as the phrase of the day indicates, from Iraqi cities and repositioned on their way to Kuwait or elsewhere in the Middle East, we're seeing a surge in the use of private forces inside of Iraq to essentially fill in the gaps that are being left by U.S. military forces. In fact, a couple of years ago, a Blackwater executive named Joseph Schmitz actually said publicly that he could see a scenario which would be a positive scenario where the U.S. could actually draw down forces and that would provide more of an opportunity for private companies. Well, Mr. Schmitz was a bit of a Nostradamus when it came to the election of Obama because the private military industry is doing incredibly well under Obama. And in Iraq right now, you have about 130,000 private contractors operating. The number of U.S. troops is evolving from week to week, but you have roughly the equivalent number of private forces and U.S. military forces in that country. The other part of Iraq, and I'm going to talk about Afghanistan in a moment, the other part of Iraq that really sends a strong signal that the United States has no intention of leaving anytime soon is the fact that the United States recently opened the largest embassy that any nation has ever had on planet Earth in the history of the world. The U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, and that's literally true, the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad is the size of 80 football fields, roughly the size of Vatican City. The Vatican has embassies in nations around the world. We have an embassy the size of the Vatican in Iraq. That embassy can staff up to 1,200 individuals and then has roughly 3,000 paramilitary forces that come from companies such as Blackwater, which recently had its contract extended indefinitely by the Obama administration in Iraq, Triple Canopy, another company with a very serious human rights abusing record, DynCorp, which has a history of sex slavery in Bosnia and other countries. These are all companies that remain on the U.S. government payroll. And in the case of Blackwater in Iraq, it is both unconscionable and unjustifiable for the Obama administration to continue doing business with this company. This is a company that is owned and controlled by one man named Erik Prince, who is an avowed Christian supremacist, whose own employees have said in sworn depositions in a court case against Blackwater that he views himself as a neo-crusader tasked with eliminating Muslims and destroying Islam globally. This is a company whose operatives carried out the single greatest massacre of Iraqi civilians by a private force in Iraq, the Nisour Square massacre, which happened on September 16, 2007, where 17 Iraqi civilians were gunned down in cold blood by the Raven 23 team from Blackwater. 5 of those individuals that participated in the massacre that day have been indicted on manslaughter charges. One Blackwater operative, a guy named Jeremy Ridgway, pled guilty to killing an unarmed Iraqi woman, shooting her in the chest as she stood in the street. This is a company that has had its arms warehouse in North Carolina raided by agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms for unlawfully possessing automatic weapons. A company that is being investigated by the Internal Revenue Service for inappropriately classifying its employees as contractors to avoid taxes. It's a company that has been investigated and is continuing to be investigated by the U.S. Congress, and is a company that the Justice Department says has operatives on the ground in Iraq who view killing Iraqi civilians as, quote, payback for 9/11. So when the Obama administration pays lip service to the idea that there's sort of a new day in U.S. foreign policy, and that there is an intent on the part of the Obama administration to have better relationships with the Muslim world, particularly with Arab countries, and then you keep on the payroll indefinitely individuals who believe that their mission in life is to kill Muslims as payback for 9/11, you are in fact sending a message to the Muslim world that in fact nothing has changed, and in fact it is even worse because the man who proclaimed himself the great agent of change is actually continuing and intensifying some of the worst Bush-era policies. In Afghanistan, we are seeing a reality now that has never been seen before in the history of U.S. military operations. For the first time ever, we now have a war in which the majority of the forces deployed by the United States are not under U.S. military command, but are actually individuals working for for-profit corporations. There are 74,000 private contractors in Afghanistan right now, alongside 68,000 U.S. troops, which means that this coalition of 600-plus companies that are operating in the U.S. wars represent the single largest force in Afghanistan, bigger than the United States, bigger than NATO, bigger in some cases than the organized Afghan military. And so you have a situation where $5.5 billion is being spent, and that's just what we know about, on U.S. military operations a month in Afghanistan, and between 25 and 40 cents on every dollar is going directly to for-profit corporations. Now, of those